Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of history's absolute biggest geopolitical mysteries. We're going to look at the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire, uncovering how a colossal titan that bridged east and west for over 600 years ultimately collapsed and basically forged the modern Middle East as we know it today. So to really understand our modern world, we have to start with a massive puzzle. Think about it. How does a 600-year-old superpower just disappear? We're talking about a global titan ruling millions across Europe, Asia, and Africa. They controlled the most crucial trade routes and holy cities on the planet. Empires of this sheer magnitude, they don't just vanish into thin air.
Well, the answer comes down to this idea: it's like a giant structure slowly cracking from every side. The empire didn't collapse suddenly. Instead, it deteriorated like a massive, once magnificent building suffering from these deep, structural cracks over centuries. And honestly, understanding how those fissures formed is literally the key to understanding global politics right now.
Okay, let's get into part one. Rise to global power, from Anatolia to a golden age.
Starting from just a tiny Anatolian state way back in 1299 under a leader named Osman I, this empire absolutely exploded into a superpower. Fast forward to 1453, and you get this defining moment. Mehmet II captures the Byzantine capital of Constantinople, which, he renames Istanbul. And this wasn't just a military win. It launched them into a glorious 16th century golden age under Suleiman the Magnificent, pushing deep into Eastern Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East.
Just to put their scale into perspective, look at the major cities they controlled: Cairo, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Mecca. This wasn't just a big country. This was the absolute center of the world. They dominated the Mediterranean Sea, held the keys to the most lucrative trade routes of the era, and governed this incredibly rich tapestry of different religions, cultures, and languages.
But things change, which brings us to part two, the anatomy of decline, when the foundation cracks.
The autopsy of their decline really comes down to four compounding pillars. First up, military weakness. While European countries were rapidly modernizing their armies, the Ottomans struggled to keep pace, which meant crucial territorial losses. Second, you've got serious government corruption. Later leaders started prioritizing their own personal wealth over the empire's needs. Third, the economic traps. As European nations figured out new sea routes to Asia, the Ottomans' vital land routes totally lost their value, forcing them into massive debt with European banks. And finally, rising nationalism. You had groups like Greeks, Serbians, Bulgarians, and Arabs demanding independence, totally inspired by European ideals.
Moving on to part three, the sick man of Europe, looking at external pressure and internal struggles.
See, by the 19th century, European powers like Britain, France, and Russia were constantly interfering. They were basically just waiting in the wings to divide up the lands of an empire they dismissively nicknamed the sick man of Europe. They looked at those structural cracks we just talked about and saw a golden ticket for their own imperial expansion.
Now, the Ottoman government didn't just sit back and take it. They desperately tried to patch things up. First, they launched the Tanzimat reforms to modernize the military, build railways, set up telegraphs, and fix schools. Then, jumping to 1908, a group of reformers known as the Young Turks actually forced political reforms and restored the constitution. But, well, these patches were temporary. They just couldn't outrun centuries of decay.
And this comparison really hits the nail on the head regarding the internal tug-of-war tearing the empire apart. On one side, you have the Sultanate clinging to absolute power and traditional rule. On the other side, the Young Turks pushing hard for modernization and reduced royal power. This fierce political instability meant that exactly when the empire needed to be totally unified to face outside threats, it was completely divided.
So let's look at part four, the final blow, World War I.
This is the big question, right? What actually broke the empire? What was the final historical earthquake that brought this massive, cracking 600-year-old structure crashing down completely? Well, joining World War I in 1914 alongside Germany and Austria-Hungary was an absolute disaster. Ottoman leaders were hoping this alliance would restore their lost glory, but instead they got dragged into chaotic, multi-front battles. Sure, they had moments of success, like the famous defense of Gallipoli, where a young commander named Mustafa Kemal Atatürk became a national hero. But the empire was crumbling from the inside. You had the Arab revolt, heavily supported by the British and guys like T.E. Lawrence, which rapidly stripped away the empire's Middle Eastern territories.
And crucially, this war brought unimaginable suffering, resulting in one of the darkest chapters of the era, the Armenian Genocide. Hundreds of thousands of Armenians died through mass killings and forced deportations. It's an incredibly tragic event and one that historians all over the world continue to study and intensely debate today.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Legacy in the Modern World, the Ashes of an Empire.
Those final years were just a rapid, unstoppable cascade of collapse. The 1918 Armistice of Mudros ended their part in the war, and by 1920 the Treaty of Sèvres proposed carving up the empire entirely. But Turkish nationalists, led by Atatürk, fought fiercely against this in the Turkish War of Independence. Their victory led to some absolutely shocking changes. The 600-year-old sultanate was abolished in 1922, and the historic caliphate followed in 1924. And right in the middle of all that, in 1923, the modern Republic of Turkey was officially born.
Now here's the so what, the reason this history matters so much to us right now. From the ruins of this structure, completely new countries emerged: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. But here's the catch. Their borders were largely drawn by European powers. They just drew these arbitrary lines on a map that completely ignored the deep ethnic and religious divisions that have been there for centuries. And as we know, that set a highly volatile stage for the conflicts dominating our news feeds today.
But, it isn't all about conflict. The legacy of the Ottomans is still vibrant today across multiple continents. They connected civilizations for centuries. You can literally see, taste, and hear their influence everywhere, in the breathtaking architecture, the food, the languages, and the daily traditions of countless regions that used to fly their banner.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to ponder. As we try to make sense of our fractured, highly complex modern world, especially in the Middle East, we really have to ask, how much of today's conflict is just the lingering echo of this giant structure crashing to the ground? Because when a 600-year-old giant falls, the ground shakes for a very, very long time. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the headlines.